Oh, let me see. I know I always tell y'all, like it's smell-o-vision, what I'm wearing today. I am wearing Lord's Lord of Misrule from Lush. This is a scent that comes out every Halloween. It only comes out in Halloween at Lush. That's why it's called Lord of Misrule. They have a bunch of different little cute little Halloween scents, but this one is popular. You may have already talked about this, but this old story, I'm just seeing the old story of a lady who outed the DL guy in your hometown. Do you have any thoughts on that? Don't remember the story. We talk about the one where he killed her. Was that the one? I remember that story years ago. That's old, where she had either she walked in on him and the guy, and then she went on the internet and was telling it, and he killed her. You want my thoughts on it? I do think I talked about it, but I don't know where I talked about it at. What video? I think that um it's kind of how I think about people hitting people. And I'm gonna say women particularly because I think that there is a social thing that rule, even though they don't be following it. But the social rule is men don't hit women. You shouldn't hit women, blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to say women just for, I think humans shouldn't be hitting humans. And if you hit somebody, you should be prepared that there is a chance that they're going to hit you back. Regardless of the rules, regardless of the imbalance of strength, regardless of what you think they should do, if you hit another human being, no matter your gender, there is a chance that they will hit you back. That's just how it is. And so that's kind of how I think about outing people. For whatever reason you out somebody, there's a chance that their response to you outing some business that they don't want to be outed, there might be some negative consequences. Now, I'm not justifying those consequences. I'm not saying that you hit this dude and he's just justified in just taking your face and boom, 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 beating your tail to a pulp, breaking your nose and da 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 da. I'm not saying that he's justified in doing that. I'm not saying that he couldn't possibly have took it too far. But when you put your hands on people, that is a possibility that somebody might take it too far. And if you out people, telling business that they don't want out, then there's a possibility that they might go too far. And that go too far could be kill you. That go too far could be beat you up. That go too far could be so many things. Not saying that that's okay, but that's the possibility. And so I I think Scar the brother said be prepared. Be prepared for what happens, what could happen. That is a possibility. So that's how I think about that. I think if you are a woman and you find out a man's his sexuality, and it's in the closet, and you want to go on the internet, not just a woman, anybody, you want to go on the internet and expose them, they might do something to you. And that is a life lesson. That, to me, that scenario that's a fuck around and find out scenario. And I think that way about many of these kind of spicy things, like trans women tricking people. Wow, that is very uncommon. But I know some women who do pussy stunts. I know some. I know that there's a possibility. But if you're pussy stunning and you get found out, it's a possibility that somebody could wear you out. It's a possibility. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm not saying that it's okay for somebody to do something to you because you tricked them. You gave them some head without them knowing. I'm never going to say that. But when you do things without people's consent and you don't give them the chance to choose what they want to participate in, there's a possibility that things can happen. Things can get real spicy, real woogie, real. You got to be prepared for that. Not saying that they should be able to do whatever they want to you, because I don't think it justifies killing somebody. But people get angry for being betrayed and tricked and bamboozled, especially around sexuality stuff. And so the possibility of people going off or decking you in your eye or beating you up or something, that know that that's the risk that you're taking. It's kind of like when you hear these cases of these young men breaking into some old lady house and she get her gun out and say, boop, 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 boop. You knew you was breaking into somebody's house. So when Granny shoot y'all up and your little friend is dead and you shot up and you may not die, but you shot up. Granny had her shit ready. She was ready. You wasn't ready. Granny was ready for the break-in. You wasn't ready for the possibility of the consequences. You thought you was gonna break in Granny's house and steal all her stuff, but Granny had the gauge waiting for you. Boom, 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 and got you together. You play recently here in Houston. A dude, the little young boys was trying to rob the dude, and he shot him. And he was on the news so sad because the little boys was like 12. He was like, they was trying to rob me. And it's on camera. They were trying to rob him. And he shot him. I didn't know they were 12. I just know that they were trying to rob me. But dang, a life cut short because he tried to rob somebody and they got them together. So that's what I think about it. I think that when you out here outing people, it's bad. Dang, 12, try to rob somebody. Yeah. It's like I'm sad that you 12 and you didn't get to live your life like to live where however long you're supposed to live. But when you out here robbing, playing the adult games, you get adult prizes. And sometimes the prizes is bullies. Yeah. Not to redirect the convo, but what happened with the Houston LGBT caucus? I don't know. I haven't. I'm not on the caucus. I don't know what's going on with them. I am on the LGBT commission, Harris County Commission. I'm a commissioner, but I'm not on the caucus. Now, in my history with the caucus, we don't really fuck with them because they're sellouts. Um, they will endorse people that are against that, not necessarily against the LGBT community, but they will won't be the best choice that people are rooting for. And so that's my history that I know with them. They're kind of very whitewashed, very moderate, very yeah, there's in that regards. Um but yes. And just think about it. If it was a low session and also your last one, yeah, just tell a niece. On Hey Rick, hey Shonette. Um and on another note, are you living for all the gays leaving ATL migrating to Houston? I Houston has a very, very, very big gay community, and so I haven't really noticed, and I'm not in the scene like that no more, so I haven't really noticed. Um, there's always been a kind of back and forth from gays moving from Houston to Atlanta, Atlanta moving from Houston. We are the biggest southern. Well, Houston is the biggest. But they've been queer meccas for a very, very long time, so it's not much different. There always been a osmosis of queer stuff happening between a queer exchange happening in between Houston and Atlanta. So I haven't really noticed it. I'm going to find the video and send them to you. The black trans woman over there released some footage of their meetings. Who is that? Who is the black trans woman? Is it Joelle? Is Joelle on the is it with Joelle? I just seen Joelle. I would want to see what footage this is. I think she's the one she's the black trans woman that's on the Houston, but they just added her like within the past either year or 2 years. She's new. So I'm glad that she has the courage to put it out there. I'm friends with Joelle. Let me see what she's posted on her page. I think that's who's on there. Joelle Espute. Joelle's been on the show. Hmm. Okay, well it's not Joelle. I don't know her. Ryan Rain. Let me see. Let me look. Houston. But they have been quite let me see who's on it. They love putting Monica on there. Her pictures. Um I don't see any pictures of people. Yeah, I don't see any tea. I have to ask around and see. Okay. And do you feel like Houston is the next hotspot for the gays? Houston has been a hotspot for the gays. um, yeah, Houston, like New Orleans, has always had a huge queer community. Um, I think Atlanta, because it's Georgia, has because of Hollywood, not Hollywood is in LA, but it's becoming the Black Hollywood. Like Atlanta is becoming, um, yeah, like the Black Hollywood. So a lot of celebrities live and move there because it's way more inexpensive than LA. And so, there's a lot of celebrities that live there that have moved there, franchises picking up, rappers. I think it's becoming like a Black Hollywood. But New Orleans and Houston has always had a big queer community for decades. For many, many, many decades. And so it doesn't feel like it's some like the next hotspot. It's always been a hotspot. Yeah, it doesn't feel like that. Not to me. I feel like Atlanta is the newest. Yeah. A lot of the internet celebrities, content creators moving here. Mm, it just might be something I'm just not noticing. I just knew there's a lot of people that were already here. Like we had a lot of internet people here. And some of them moved to other places and then they came back. I've experienced that a lot. Like internet friends moving away and then coming back. Oh, yeah. I can see that. I can see that's why Tyler Perry built his studio there. All right, y'all ready? Oh, we done. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. All right. So this is called Imagining a Queer America, Chapter 3.
3. Imagining a Queer America. Through the Revolution, Americans developed a firmer sense of themselves as a nation. As the century moved forward, the process was complicated by the abolition of slavery, a huge increase in Asian and European immigration, and debates about the enfranchisement of women. By the 1870s, many minority groups in America had cohesive collective identities, and individuals within those groups saw themselves as Americans. These collective and individual identities, sometimes race or immigrant-based, were frequently rejected by those who were here earlier and saw themselves as the real Americans. The challenge of how diverse peoples could form a single American identity resulted in tremendous institutional and individual violence against people whose identities or actions were viewed as threatening to mainstream culture.
Okay.
At the center of this violence.
So, just to recap, we have established that from the Civil War and from the American Revolution, we are at this point in American history, we are we are defining what American is. We are defining what it is. In the last chapter, we talked about the colonies, we talked about the separation from um, England. We talked about how they did not want religion to be a power. All these ideals that we talk about even today, this is the time when these are being brainstormed and the America as an experiment was being created. But simultaneously, that identity, what happens is you got this diverse conglomerate of melting pot of people. We know America's the melting pot, blah blah blah. We have that, but they're also trying to create this one streamlined idea of what is an American. So you got all of these people, Japanese people, which what he just said is there's so many people coming in from black people who were shipped here, but now they're citizens, and you get what I'm saying? All of these different types of people, and even in what we would consider white, there is some nuance. Now we consider some of these people white, but in this era of time, they weren't considered white. Like when we think about Jewish, that's something that wasn't assimilated into whiteness as as we would know it today. Um, Irish wasn't assimilated into whiteness as we would know it today. All of these things made them not white, like the perfect Anglo-Saxon white. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we're coming in a time where, you get what I'm saying, we're coming from a time where we're trying to make the American identity something like whatever we have made the rules is, and this can harm people who did not fit into the identity. So
is the Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865. As terrible as this war was, America was already familiar with violence. In the War of 1812, the Republic fought the British for almost 3 years. The fighting was brutal. Fatalities for both sides mounted to 24,181 from combat and rampant disease, with 8,184 combatants wounded. 3 decades later, in the midst of U.S. westward expansion, Mexico declared war on the United States in response to the U.S. annexation of Texas.
one second. I do want to answer this question because it's really easy. How did just ATL get so stigmatized being the gay capital in Black culture? Because there was a migration of Black people going to Atlanta in the 90s because of all the Black schools that are there. When we think about Morehouse, when we think about Spelman, when we think about the Black schools that was there. Also, the South has the most Black people of anywhere in this country. We have the highest concentration of Black people. And so when we think of Black queers, we're going to have the highest concentration of Black queers. And so they're going to navigate towards the popular cities. You're going to have them in New Orleans. You're going to have them in Houston. You're going to have them in Miami, and you're going to have them in Atlanta. They're going to migrate to the bigger cities because it's the city. In rural, usually small town rural places are going to be less progressive. Not saying that they're just going to be, oh my God, freedom for all, but the cities are going to be going to have the most resources. They're going to have a little bit more progressive mindsets, and they're going to have communities of people helping each other survive. So when you think about the 80s and the 90s, when that queer migration started, Atlanta is going to be one of those places that's going to grow, and because it's growing as a popular place for shit happening. When we think about Freaknik, when we think about so Atlanta itself, and the Olympics being there, and you know, and also the history of Atlanta is tons of wealthy Black people in Atlanta. They had a thriving middle class of Black people. So when you think about Atlanta, it's similar to how DC is, not exactly, but where there is a lot of old Black money in Atlanta. It's not just it's a lot of old Black money. There's a thriving middle class in Atlanta that is good for business, that is good for success, that is good for growing. And so it's something that something that just made it a hotbed for queer growth when it comes to the population coming there and feeling, being able to find a whole Black ass community. Um, the title of this book is A Queer History of the United States by Michael Bromsky.
Between 1846 and 1848, the Mexican War claimed the lives of 6,863 soldiers and 14,126 civilians. In addition, along with the endless and sometimes deadly violence perpetrated on African slaves, extraordinary violence was used to put down numerous slave rebellions. As the country expanded to the west and the south, hundreds of thousands of native peoples were forcibly evacuated from their homelands and relocated in the west. Thousands of these native peoples died during the relocation, and thousands more died resisting. Violence was intrinsic to the expansion of the United States in a process known by the self-aggrandizing euphemism, manifest destiny. As the federal government rapidly acquired land, the Louisiana Purchase occurred in 1803, the Mexican Cession in 1848, and the purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867, the size of the United States more than tripled in just over 40 years. For the growing white population of the United States, the early years of the 19th century were still heady from the excitement of the Revolution. There were ongoing crises, but also a sense of fresh possibilities and new ideals of personal and national freedom. The Revolution had been conceptualized and run by colonial men of wealth. It was essentially a transfer of power from the European imperial elite to the local elite, but its radical ideals took root in society. This new spirit is best exemplified in the rise of soldier and later president Andrew Jackson in the 1820s. Jacksonian democracy and early populism extended the vote to all white men, not just property-owning white men. Jackson's championing of the common man, a rejection of both the civilized behavior of the Englishman and the Eastern city man, extended and expanded the revolutionary masculinity of the War of Independence. Expansion. The West. Jackson stood in bold contrast to the Founding Fathers. He, along with Daniel Boone, Jim Bowie, and Davy Crockett, represented the new American hero and was mythologized in popular culture for his masculine adventures. These iconic men, who refused to follow society's rules, were emblematic of the era's westward expansion. America was not only the land of the free, but the land of fewer rules. Certainly the women and men who migrated westward in the 19th century lived under far fewer rules, including those governing gender and sexual behavior. Because of harsh living conditions, the absence of strict legal policing, and relaxed demands of accepted propriety, gender norms in the West were markedly different from those in the East. For men, this meant being able to embody the image of the American man who was bold, adventurous, and often uninhibited in his behaviors, including sexual behavior. Not all men in the West adhered to this image. There were tradesmen, preachers, and school teachers, as well as men who worked the mines and the plains. Still, the early and mid-19th century West promulgated the image of an independent man who did not need civilization, women, or even overt heterosexuality to define his manhood. For women, westward expansion often meant a release from the enforced gender restrictions they faced in the East. Wives and mothers in the Western territories often did not conform to urban gender expectations since they were running farms or ranches. Many women took on jobs traditionally held by men. Martha Jane Canary Burke, known as Calamity Jane, was an innkeeper and an army scout. Stagecoach Mary Fields, a former slave, gained fame as a stagecoach driver, the first African-American driver for the U.S. Post Office.
Okay. I don't want y'all to miss this. So they're talking about Western expansion, going from the colonies and southern states, like the colonies, and expanding west. So when we think about Western expansion to them, think about everything from like Oklahoma on, Arkansas, what kind of Arkansas? Everything on is Western expansion. So when we think about like Oklahoma, the Great Plains, Texas, further Rocky Mountains, Colorado, Arizona, all the shit over here. So what they're explaining is how, because of the cityfied shit that was happening over here and the rules and the pressure of living a certain type of distinguished way, had not expanded so far, there was men and women who was living against these kind of silly ass rules that was happening far east. Do you see what I'm saying? So if you know how as we expand west, this totally lends itself to what we know of today as far as the west. When we think about west coast, there's a lot of liberal shit that was kind of accepted when we think about accept blackness and the freedom of being black. It doesn't mean that there wasn't any racism or there wasn't racists coming over from the south and the east and coming over here from the gold rush, da da da. It doesn't mean that that didn't exist at all, but there was a lot of nuance going on when it came to over here on the West Coast. That's why Black people could come over here and be really, really free um, and have opportunities that they would have never had over here. When we think about Mary Ellen Pleasant, who was one of the first early millionaires, or early women business owners. Now, her because why somebody like Madam C.J. Walker would come on and kind of take the mantle of that is because Mary Ellen, her money was stolen from her by it because it was connected to a white man, and so she couldn't claim that title because it wasn't hers technically, but they stole all her money. Anyway, that's Mary Ellen Pleasant. I did a voiceover guest acting spot on this podcast called Draptomania, produced by my homegirl Janicia. She been on the show, and it kind of was funded by, I think it was like funded by Pharrell. Not I think he was one of the money people behind creating the show. Um, and we did an episode about Mary Ellen Pleasant, and it was so dope. So check that out. I think it's called Draptomania, Draptomaniacs. Let me see if I can find it so I can link it to y'all. Yes, it is hosted by Michael Harriet. I think I can put it here. Yes, my episode is the Mary Ellen Pleasant episode. It's me, Torre, Jody Sims. It just is a good talk about Black capitalism. Yeah, I love it. Check it out. It's only like 40 minutes. Anyway, so they could come over. That's why some trans history, when we think about Lucy Hicks Anderson and how she was able to go there and create her laundress business. It just was a different vibe over here. It was just a little bit more free on the West because they didn't have those kind of weird ass rules, which makes total sense that the Mormons will come over here and take over because they can kind of do what they want. They didn't have to follow the Christian ideology over here that was happening in the East. They can create. They're Christian. They're offset of Christianity, but they can do it their own way. And so, do you see what I'm saying? I hope I'm making that clear. What we see of as far as what's happening on the West Coast, this is the reason why it's happening. Even, excuse me, even the history of Oregon being this white, wanting it to be this white utopia. Initially, they wanted it to be this all white utopia, but even them, that was just some people using that. remnants of racism trying to create this space, running away from what was changing in the East. That's why so many different things was happening on the West Coast. And that's why we have this kind of blended, even coming from Mexico, people coming from Mexico. And it's just so many things that was happening going west that was different, that made them a hotbed for more progressive ideals, more liberal ideals, less grips on like racism, less apt to stick to those kind of racist and sexist ideas. And so that's why California became this blue state that it is today, and other places too. But yeah, I wanted to share that. Just point that out.
There's extensive documentation of women who dressed and passed as men. Charlotte Darky Parkhurst, known as One-Eyed Charlie or Six-Horse Charlie, was an expert stagecoach driver who turned to ranching and lumbering when her job was eliminated by the railroad. San Francisco's Jean Bonnet was repeatedly arrested for cross-dressing and petty theft. At the end of her short life, she organized prostitutes to leave their work and make a living shoplifting. Life on the Western Frontier was frequently sex-segregated, creating homosocial communities and relationships. Brothels, for instance, which thrived in towns such as Deadwood and Rapid City, as well as cities such as San Francisco, resulted in complicated female-centered social groups as the women who worked in them offered one another comfort and safety. Little concrete evidence can be found of sexual relationships among men or women within these communities. Such relationships, even if tacitly acceptable, would have been illegal and thus unacceptable or dangerous to record. There is, however, strong evidence in fiction and poetry of the frequency of intense male-male relationships. Less evidence exists for women's same-sex relationships in the West, perhaps because women had less access to publishing. Jonathan Ned Katz documents the implicit eroticism in these relationships in Western poet Badger Clark's The Lost Partner. We loved each other in the way men do, and never spoke about it, Al and me, but we both knowed, and knowing it so true, was more than any woman's kiss could be. We knowed,
Thumbs up.
The way was smooth or rough, the weather shine or pour. While I had him, the rest seemed good enough, but he ain't here no more. What is there out beyond the last divide? Seems like that country must be cold and dim. He'd miss this sunny range he used to ride, and he'd miss me, the same as I do him. It's no use thinking. All I'd think or say could never make it clear. Out that dim trail that only leads one way, he's gone, and left me here. The range is empty and the trails are blind, and I don't seem but half myself today. I wait to hear him riding up behind, and feel his knee rub mine the good old way.
Period.
These verses, written in the early 20th century, offer a glimpse of what a romanticized homosocial world of the American West meant in American culture. 19th century American Western culture produced the mythic cowboy, whose iconic image resonates today as the prototypical American male. This is a central paradox of U.S. masculinity. Masculinity has been increasingly defined by active heterosexual desire and relationships, yet is also defined by participation in an all-male homosocial world that has the potential for sexual interaction. This paradox is predicated on the idea that men are more free outside of the civilizing presence of women, who demand they behave in accord with artificial social standards. Civilization, often signified by home and family, is contrasted with the wilderness, which becomes a male refuge. As cultural critic Chris Packard notes, the cowboy is queer, he is odd, he doesn't fit in, he resists community. The myth of the American West often locates civilizing forces in the teeming, conformist urban East, the antithesis of the natural wilderness. The mythic lone cowboy, sometimes coupled with a partner, is emblematic of the revolt against not only social dictates and conformity, but also institutional heterosexuality. The cowboy is culturally positioned as a man outside of the law. Clark's poem, The Outlaw, argues that the cowboy and the outlaw are the same. The internal struggle it conveys, metaphorically, a cowboy breaking a horse, is between the natural man, the beast, and the civilized man. When the devil at rest underneath my vest gets up and begins to paw, and my hot tongue strains at its bridle reins, then I tackle the real outlaw. When I get plumb riled and my sense goes wild, and my temper is fractious growed, if he'll hump his neck just a trifling speck, then it's dollars to dimes I'm throwed. For a man is a man, but he's partly a beast. He can brag till he makes you deaf, but the one lone brute from the west to the east that he can't quite break is himself. The outlaw is an example of the internal conflict between control and liberation, a struggle that also reflects the ambivalence of society at large. The relationship between the cowboy and his partner is distinct from the idealized romantic friendship seen in the letters of Daniel Webster or Lafayette. The cowboy is an isolated man, and his intimate friendships have more to do with being away from civilization, as this excerpt from Owen Wister's 1891 short story, Hank's Woman, demonstrates. Here, two intimate friends call off their futile attempts at fishing to go swimming. "Have you studied much about marriage?" he now inquired. His serious eyes met mine as he lay stretched along the ground. "Not much," I said. "Not very much." "Let's swim," he said. "They've changed their minds." Forthwith, we shook off our boots and dropped our few clothes, and heedless of what fish we might now drive away, we went into the cool, slow, deep breadth of backwater which the bend makes just there. As he came up near me, shaking his head of black hair, the cowpuncher was smiling a little. "Not that any number of baths," he remarked, "would conceal a man's objectionableness from an antelope, not even a she one." We dried before the fire, without haste. To need no clothes is better than purple and fine linen. Then he tossed the flapjacks, and I served the trout. And after this we lay on our backs upon a buffalo hide to smoke and watch the Tetons grow more solemn as the large stars opened out over the sky. "I don't care if I never go home," said I. This domestic scene, complete with making dinner, is home. Literally home on the range for the narrator, but a home removed from civilization and women. These men are outside of society's control, but feeling at home with themselves. These sentiments in 19th century American Western literature increase in the later decades of the century when the West was becoming more civilized. They offered imaginative alternative models to heterosexuality and some forms of same-sex friendship. Clark's and Wister's writings, published just after the time when the Old West was the frontier between nature.
I don't think it was because what made it so groundbreaking, but I think you're on to something in regards to the image of them. When we think of gay men, we think of usually the image of gay men is something that is really, really urban. So when we think about, if you picture the stereotypical gay man, he's going to be in a city. We're going to think about him having access to going to a gay club and the lights, the action, the fashion. It is not, we don't think about horse riding, cowboy, middle of America. Because when we think middle of America, we think of conformity, we think of boring, we think of backwoods religion, and you know that kind of idea of we can't be free here. Gay people run away from there to go to places like New York and San Francisco and New Orleans and Atlanta. We go to these kind of cities. So that's not the image that we get. Even though homosexuality is everywhere, you can go anywhere and find lesbians. You can go anywhere and find gay men. You can go anywhere, any culture. I've never been to one that they didn't exist. And so when we think about Brokeback Mountain, it is this image that they are describing, this kind of alone, we're away from society, we're up here, exactly what they're describing. That's why you getting the images there. Um, um, and and the difficulty in their relationship. And then I think what made it groundbreaking is that the care in which they depicted the stories between these two men that loved each other. I think that's what made it groundbreaking. It wasn't just, oh, we're sharing the story of these down low. It wasn't the salaciousness of them being straight men and cheating on their wives. It really was a love story between two men and how they were navigating um, homosexuality and the pressures of being a man, and how they were navigating that and how they were balancing the love. Recently, I told y'all that I watched a show called Mr. Loverman, and this is a. I feel like that series is a black version of what we were seeing. Um, it involved the woods. I think, Shawnette. I think if you watch Mr. Loverman, I think that I feel like it was one of the best depictions of Black men's queer sexuality in a nuanced way that's similar to not definitely not open Black queer men, but two down low relationships. Um, um, here you go, sweetie. This is where I watched it. It's actually on BBC. It's a UK based show, so you can't watch it on American streaming. But I got you hook you up with a good bootleg. Do you think Moonlight did the same thing? I think Moonlight was a good one. I loved Moonlight. I thought Moonlight was beautiful. It was beautiful. But that we don't get to see them. We see them young. We see their budgeting love young, and then they kind of reconnect when they got older. We don't really see what happens going forward after that. We don't see what happens. When Chiron meets him in the diner at the end, you know what I'm saying? You don't really see the love story happen. You kind of see them kind of the sexual experimentation, but you don't really get to see the what happens as they got older. So Mr. Loverman, it shares it's literally showing you how they navigated their relationship the whole time. I feel like Brokeback Mountain and Mr. Loverman are more of a reflection of that, where it's showing you how they fell in love as teenagers, how they continue to be in love, how they navigated men's responsibility as they got older, and how they came out, like how it comes out. Um, I feel like Mr. Loverman was the best. I think it's really, really not. I think it just was really, really, really good. And that's a link to Mr. Loverman. Make sure y'all check that out. I can do a review of that if y'all want me to. I would love to go episode by episode because it is good to me. Let me know if y'all want to do that because it is the whole season. It's a series, so it's not like a movie. It's a series, so episode. Um, and then I just love the writers, how the writers don't tell you everything going on because there's a lot going on. It's just not their relationship. Um, it's a lot. But yeah, so I think with Brokeback Mountain, we have the image of the cowboy, the image of this rugged, outdoorsy, masculine image. That is that's what they're describing in this book. That's what we are kind of what they're describing. Yeah. Thank you. My brown apple Johnny Hathaway. My hair is a mess. I've got a color. I am about to go red again. So I'm gonna dye it either maybe tonight or tomorrow. I'm tired of this blonde. It's not giving me what I need. I want to be a redhead again. But yes. Um, every time I watch you, I leave fed. Thank you. You're like the Marsha P. Johnson of a lifetime. You shifted the culture for me. Oh, I appreciate that. I don't consider myself Marsha. We don't really have anything in common, but um, I don't know. Yeah, I would. Who would I consider myself to be? I don't know. No, I don't consider myself Marsha though. We don't have anything in common. Marsha was kind of retarded. Groundbreaking, but she was kind of, there was something touched about her. Something off. You can tell she either is autistic or um maybe that's not the right word to say, not retarded. That's problematic. There's something off with her. Like when I hear her talk, there's something off. And I don't consider myself her.
And civilization exemplify how the associations between same-sex desire and frontier life became all the more powerful as reverberations in memory. Whatever the sexual and affectional lives of the cowboys, the decidedly non-heterosexual myths that grew about them became deeply entrenched in mainstream culture. The actual conditions that bred these myths, however, were much more systemic than two partners alone on the range. The beginnings of community. From its earliest days, San Francisco was known as a wide-open town, an urban space with few social restrictions and a high tolerance for illegal behavior, including same-sex sexual activity and deviation from gender norms. The roots of this reputation can be found in the mostly all-male culture of the gold rush. Saloons, dance halls, rowdy theaters, and brothels were plentiful, and, except for a small number of female workers, were patronized only by men. In 1846, the population of San Francisco, then called Yerba Buena, was just over 500. In 1848, gold was discovered at nearby Sutter's Mill in Coloma. The next year, nearly 90,000 people journeyed to Northern California, only half of them from the United States. In 1855, the area's population had swelled by another 300,000. San Francisco's population grew correspondingly. In 1850, it had jumped to 25,000. A decade later, it was 56,800, and by 1870, it had nearly tripled to 149,500. Housing consisted mainly of rooming houses and cheap hotels, augmented by all-male public baths. In 1849, there were only 300 women, two-thirds of them prostitutes, in a population of 25,000. In 1850, organized same-sex dancing was perfectly acceptable, as was entertainment featuring cross-dressing. The public social life in San Francisco was so vibrantly nonconformist that British adventurer Frank Marriott, in his 1855 memoir, Mountains and Molehills, or Recollections of a Burnt Journal, dubbed it Sodom by the Sea.
So I want y'all to clock that. Trans people, one of the oldest places, and I'm talking about in America. Not saying that people didn't exist in other places at the time. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is documented. One of the oldest places, the first documented people who identified as like transsexual, transvesties, trans people living their lives as their identity. Documented. One of the oldest places is San Francisco. And what they're describing is why that's the reason why that was a possibility, is because how they're describing it started. There was like a gold rush that was happening and people were coming from all kinds of places and they didn't have the social rules that were happening on the East. And so prostitutes was coming, cross-dressers was coming, men, frontier men, pioneers coming, coming and just creating this space. And so she was on the spectrum, yes. And so there was this culture that was allowing people to be more free sexually, how they presented when it comes to their identity, and people knew it. So queer people who were in places in other places, they knew to come here was free, and that's why he was like, "It's the Sodom of by the sea." Da da da. Just a fucking churchy nigga. And that doesn't mean that these people looking for money didn't come from these kind of city-fied places on the East and come here to be free and try to implement some of the rules. That doesn't mean that that didn't happen. But you get the idea that I'm trying to describe, that this was a freer place than other places. They didn't have the structural oppression that was common in the East yet over here in the West. And it didn't really take hold ever, which is why really didn't take hold fully or to the extent that the East Coast did.
The racial and ethnic diversity of this nearly all-male population contributed to a culture of uneasy and frequently disrupted tolerance unique to the area and the time. Many men who migrated to California and San Francisco were from South America, China, and Europe. In 1870, when San Francisco was the 8th largest city in America, close to 60% of its citizens were of foreign birth. There was also a large influx of fugitive slaves and free Africans during this time. In 1867, African Americans could use public transportation, and by 1869, they could vote. 6 years later, San Francisco schools were desegregated for blacks. Hispanic and Chinese communities were central to creating San Francisco's economic infrastructure and shaping its sensibilities in food, architecture, and popular culture.
Boom. So y'all see what we're saying? How it desegregated quick. There was tons of Asians here and helping the economy, helping make the city. That's why in San Francisco, the Chinese people are one of the biggest minorities there and have tons of political power. That is, they have the highest population of Chinese people in the country in San Francisco and what we today. And so we see why they had such a stronghold here in San Francisco because of the history they had in the city. And so do you see what I'm saying? Even on a racial level, it allowed for it to be this kind of free place.
But as the presence of immigrants grew, so did strong anti-immigrant sentiment. In the 1850s, there was organized mob violence against people from Latin America. Anti-Chinese sentiment led to the passage of the Federal Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which was enforced until 1943. Miscegenation laws were frequently enforced. Institutionalized racism against some groups was integral to social interactions, but was constantly being negotiated. In San Francisco, individual freedom was both enhanced and hampered by community structures. Its hospitality toward non-conformative sexual and gender expression had much to do with its constantly changing social structures. A second reason that non-normative sexuality and gender was relatively acceptable in San Francisco after 1849 was its thriving economy. The presence of large businesses, such as Wells Fargo and the city's position as a major seaport, made San Francisco a center of commerce, a status enhanced in 1869 by the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. John D'Amelio argues that historically, LGBT communities benefit in societies predicated on free labor, that is, a non-family unit-based economy in which unmarried women and men are able to sustain economic independence.
Boom. I want y'all to clock that. This is why we're reading this book. So, when a city has booming and thriving economic advances and economic freedoms, it allows people to live however they want. They're not predicated, their freedom is not predicated on whether or not they can survive or not. When you in some backwoods ass conservative place where you can only get a job if you conform, I won't say backwoods, but some location that you can only work and survive if you conform to the ideals of that location, there's no freedom. So when you come out west, you can actually get a job and start a business and do things on your own with your own rules because we got the railroad coming and bringing business and bringing economic advancement. Then we got people coming from Asia, people coming from Mexico and coming up, and it's just a conglomerate of people finding their way and being successful at it without having to conform. And of course, there's going to be other forces coming in trying to control the narrative and trying to control the rules and implement rules from other places. That all is going to happen, but it's just not going to take hold and work in the ways that it would other places if the social economic opportunities were less, because it was abundant at this time. I can be the big butcher lesbian running a business and successful and not having to follow the woman rules. I can be a cross dresser or whatever. I can be all of these things because I have business booming, whether it be illegal or legal. There's business booming here. And so that's what they're talking about. Because of the thriving economic, these people can be free to do what they want to do. Doesn't mean that people didn't conform. It doesn't mean that people didn't try to fight them to conform. It didn't mean any of that. But it's just the likeliness of you being able to be yourself and do life how you wanted to do life. It made it higher because you had enough access to money and resources to be able to do what you want to do.
The boom economy of San Francisco in the second half of the 19th century is a prime example. A closely connected idea is historian George Chauncey's argument that gay and lesbian communities found their earliest manifestations in poor and working class cultures because wealthier classes could maintain a greater degree of personal privacy. For LGBT people, the luxury of privacy was antithetical to forming communities which are, by their nature, public in bringing similar people together. Even as it prospered economically, late 19th century San Francisco insisted on maintaining its identity as an outlaw culture. But not all San Franciscans embraced the idea of a wide-open town. In response to rising crime in 1851 and 1856, vigilante committees were formed to combat vice. These groups wielded, often by violence, enormous social and political power in efforts to curb what they saw as social anarchy and excessive sexuality. This tension between social and sexual freedom and the demands of mainstream society to control and contain these actions, essentially demanding that they remain private, often by use of violence, contributed to the shifting terms in the national debate about sexual behavior and gender. San Francisco provided, for the first time in U.S. culture, an idea of how a community of outlaws can form and what can happen when concepts of private and public become more integrated. Writing a new national culture. The East. Paradoxically, as westward expansion...
All right. But here come the foolery. And he's about to talk about it. So you know that the power of the country is in the East. And they're trying to make this the United States. They're trying to make this whole area the United States of America. As you get what I'm saying, as they push west, they're trying to Louisiana Purchase and everything going west. They're trying to make it the United States of America. So when we get this shit, it has to federally follow the rules of what was going on in the East, because that Washington D.C. and the colonies, the powers are powering. And once you become a part of the United States, you now have to follow the federal laws. All of us have to follow those laws. You're not the wild, wild west frontier no more. Once you become a part of the United States, you got to start following the federal laws. And that means Jim Crow start coming. All that shit.
Made the country geographically larger. New technologies, the invention of the telegraph in the late 1830s, the growth of a national railway system, and the telephone in the 1870s facilitated travel and communications, making the country smaller and more cohesive. In these conditions, we see the eventual flourishing of a distinctly American intellectual and literary culture. Washington Irving's 1820 short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, promotes the ideal of robust, decidedly heterosexual masculinity as embodied by Brom Bones, Van Brunt, over that of the lanky, effeminized schoolteacher, Ichabod Crane. Both men are courting young Katrina Van Tassel until Brom Bones frightens Crane out of town. Irving's gender and sexual message is clear. Crane's first name means inglorious in Hebrew, which Bible-literate contemporary readers would know. And as literary critic Caleb Crane points out, much of the action of the story takes place by Major Andre's tree. This is a reference to Major John Andre, the British officer, generally thought to be a lover of men, who collaborated with Benedict Arnold and was hanged by George Washington as a spy in 1780. For Irving, nearly 4 decades after the Revolution, the new, clearly heterosexual American man was an imperative.
Now wait, y'all clock that. We just we just talked about George Washington and his lover sending messages back and forth, and his lover really just laying it on thick, like, I miss you, babe. Why are you ghosting me? And then we have a tree, and we also talked about how art reflects, usually is the first time that you're going to reflect these ideal. And in this book, Sleepy Hollow, the tree that all of this stuff was happening around, if you watch the movie Sleepy Hollow, but also read Sleepy Hollow, was named after a homosexual dude, openly homosexual dude, that George Washington ended up hanging. Not for being homosexual, but you see how this gay nigga done hung this other gay nigga, but they weren't openly gay, and well, he was, and he's the image of him is embedded in this art. But also, growing up, I know you didn't hear about George Washington's being gay. He is seen as the first president of the United States. Nobody is talking about his queerness in anything. We don't hear about none of this shit because of the illusion that we are trying to give our forefathers of this country that matches with heterosexuality and matches with a certain masculinity. We always see him depicted on horses, of course, in wigs, but at the time that was considered heels and shit was considered masculine. Uh, in horses, we get this masculine depiction of our forefathers of this country. So I wanted to kind of point that out to make sure y'all clock that he was hung on a tree by somebody else who was queer, all on the down low.
In contrast to Irving, also in 1820, 19-year-old Harvard student Ralph Waldo Emerson was writing entries in his journal about Martin Gay, a fellow student 3 years younger to whom he was attracted. 2 years earlier, when he had first seen Gay, Emerson wrote, "I begin to believe in the Indian doctrine of eye fascination."
Wait, y'all know Emerson, when we think about Thoreau, Emerson, Faulkner, these great American white literary icons, Dickerson, Emily Dickerson. We don't hear about their queer stuff. We don't hear about their queer stuff. We hear about because they're considered the fathers of American literature. We don't hear about that queer shit going on. But here we go. In letters, he's talking about him living for another boy. But we don't hear about that because they're too busy erasing our history from stuff.
The cold blue eye of, Emerson deleted the name here, has so intimately connected him to my thoughts and visions that 12 times a day, and as often, by night, I have found myself wholly wrapped up in conjectures of his character and inclinations. We have had already 2 or 3 profound stares at one another. Be it wise or weak or superstitious, I must know him. Crane notes that Emerson's attraction to Gay was a form of the 19th century ideal of sympathy. In this context, sympathy, a form of empathy that, as Crane writes, allows us to feel emotions that are not ours, is an expansive form of romantic friendship. The deeply felt connective emotion of sympathy allows one to not only value a friend for his or her emotional sincerity, but to take imaginative leaps toward understanding and sharing the emotions of another. This new understanding of the possibilities of shared emotion was likely inflected by the new America of wide-open Western spaces, natural landscape, and the outlaw. In 1837, Emerson published Nature, an essay fundamental in defining transcendentalism, the distinctly American philosophy promoting individual spiritual transcendence through experiencing the material world, especially nature, rather than through organized religion. The next year, in his American Scholar speech, he urged his audience to rethink the idea of the American man, by which he meant humans, and to create an independent, original, and free national literature. Animated by the ideal of an expansive sympathy influenced by the naturalness of America, Emerson argued for an egalitarian society that values all of its members' individual contributions to a whole. The doctrine that there is one man, present to all particular men only partially or through one faculty, and that you must take the whole society to find the whole man. Man is not a farmer or a professor or an engineer, but he is all. Man is priest and scholar and statesman and producer and soldier. Emerson's vision of American equality, the basis for his strong anti-slavery and pro-women's suffrage beliefs, has roots in the Enlightenment and in his radical, nature-based vision of Christianity. But it is especially rooted in his ability to admit and emotionally explore his attraction to, his sympathy with, other men. Same-sex affection was integral to understanding the mutually beneficent dynamics of the individual in society. This egalitarian same-sex affection placed the rugged individualism of the revolutionary man into a new context, not of conquering an American landscape, but of emerging from it and being at one with it. This was the cornerstone of a new way of understanding gender, desire, and personal and social liberty. The feelings Emerson had for Martin Gay, his journals indicate sympathy for other young men as well, did not stop him from marrying twice and fathering 4 children. Emerson did not easily embrace all aspects of this sympathy. In 1824, he wrote in his journal, "He that loosely forgets himself here and lets his friend be privy to his words and acts which base desires extort from him has forfeited like a fool the love he prized." This is an example of an internal tension that reflected a larger tension between sympathy and overt sexuality, that is, moving from a private emotion to publicly expressing that emotion. Emerson was not the only person dealing with this conflation of desires, emotions, and political ideas. A wealth of homoerotic sentiments are present in the poems and journals of Henry David Thoreau. Meditations on friendship run throughout his journal, and by the 1840s, they became increasingly erotic. Feb. 18, 1840. All romance is grounded on friendship. What is this rural, this pastoral, this poetical life but its invention? Does not the moon shine for Endymion? Smooth pastures and mild airs are foursome Corydon and Phyllis. Paradise belongs to Adam and Eve. Plato's republic is governed by Platonic love. Thoreau's invoking of Endymion, Corydon, and Plato strongly suggests a homosexual subtext. The 2 mythological figures were iconic representations for same-sex male desire in Renaissance art, and the republic was, in part, an analysis of male friendship and love. Thoreau is using friendship as a metaphor here. However, his attraction to the eroticized male body appears throughout his journals without mythological trappings, but rather with a decidedly transcendentalist bent. June 12, 1852. Boys are bathing in Hubbard's Bend, playing with the boat, I at the willows. The color of their bodies in the sun at a distance is pleasing, the not often seen flesh color. I hear the sound of their sport borne over the water. As yet we have not man in nature. What a singular fact for an angel visitant to this earth to carry back in his notebook that men were forbidden to expose their bodies under the severest penalties. A pale pink, which the sun would soon tan. White men. There are no white men to contrast with the red and the black. They are of such colors as the weaver gives them. I wonder that the dog knows his master where he goes in to bathe and does not stay by his clothes. Thoreau's message is that civilization, with its severest penalties, is most unnatural. He is arguing that nature not only allows for exposure, but is a space for racial equality, one wherein even the idea of whiteness is exposed as a lie. Alluding to classical literature and the European culture it inspired was a common method for 19th century American intellectuals to discuss sexuality and sexual behaviors. Used consciously to reinforce ideas about American citizenship and democratic structures, the older culture safely places the sexuality at a distance. Margaret Fuller, a leading figure in the Transcendentalist movement and author of Women of the 19th Century, the first major feminist publication in the United States, was also connecting to same-sex erotic intimacy and a new American ideal. In 1843, several years after viewing Danish sculptor Bertel Thorvaldsen's Ganymede at a Boston exhibition, Fuller wrote Ganymede to his eagle, a poem about the beautiful boy abducted by Zeus in the form of an eagle to be his lover and cupbearer. Here the cupbearer speaks to the eagle. Before I saw thee, I was like the May, longing for summer that must mar its bloom, or like the morning star that calls the day, whose glories to its promise are the tomb. And as the eager fountain rises higher to throw itself more strongly back to earth, Still, as more sweet and full rose my desire, more fondly it reverted to its birth. For what the rosebud seeks tells not the rose. The meaning foretold by the boy, the man cannot disclose. Caleb Crane notes that Fuller is referring not only to the implicit homoeroticism of the original myth, but, more important, to the eagle as the emblem of sovereignty of the United States. Thus, she consciously conflates mythological same-sex desire with the democratic progress of the nation. Fuller is indicating that the longing for freedom implicit in same-sex desire and sympathy cannot be fully expressed. The rosebud cannot tell the rose what it feels, because its power, at root political, emanates from being unspoken. In much of this literature is an underlying assumption that unspoken feelings are stronger than articulated ones. In 1839, at the age of 29, Fuller wrote to a woman friend of long standing, "With regard to yourself, I was to you all that I wished to be. I knew that I reined in your thoughts in my own way, and I also lived with you more truly and freely than with any other person. We were truly friends, but it was not friends as men are friends to one another, or as brother and sister. There was also that pleasure which may, perhaps, be termed conjugal, or finding oneself in an alien nature. Is there any tinge of love in this? Possibly." Emily Dickinson, who wrote explicitly about intimacy between women in the mid-19th century, showed her large body of work to a handful of people and published fewer than a dozen poems. A member of a well-to-do Amherst, Massachusetts family, she was unmarried, lived a reclusive life, and was passionately devoted to her friend Sue Gilbert, who later married Dickinson's brother Austin. The homoerotic content in Dickinson's poetry is notable for its time. The language breaks from that of romantic friendships and reflects the transcendentalist idea that desire is more powerful and true in its imaginative parameters. Her sweet weight on my heart a night had scarcely deigned to lie, when, stirring, for belief's delight, my bride had slipped away. If 'twas a dream, made solid, just the heaven to confirm, or if myself were dreamed of her, the power to presume, with him remain, who unto me gave, even as to all, a fiction superseding faith, by so much as 'twas real. Dickinson's directness, like Fuller's letter, is remarkable. She clearly has complete access to erotic desires for other women. This is also true in her letters to Gilbert, of which over 300 survive. She wrote the following just as Austin Dickinson was beginning his courtship of Sue Gilbert. June 11, 1852. Susie, forgive me, darling, for every word I say. My heart is full of you. None other than you is in my thoughts. Yet when I seek to say to you something not for the world, words fail me. If you were here, and oh, that you were, my Susie, we need not talk at all. Our eyes would whisper for us, and your hand fast in mine, we would not ask for language. I try to bring you nearer. I chase the weeks away till they are quite departed, and fancy you have come, and I am on my way through the green lane to meet you, and my heart goes scampering so that I have much ado to bring it back again, and learn it to be patient till that dear Susie comes. What does it mean that Dickinson wrote poems, some explicit in their eroticism, that she never shared? Were they intended for a larger audience? Or did she simply write them for herself? There is no concrete answer. But Dickinson's quiet domestic life was the reality for many women, and her poetic dictum, Tell the Truth but Tell It Slant, poem 1129, recognized that writing outside of prescribed codes was dangerous, especially for a woman. For men, the social and political atmosphere of mid-century allowed for public expressions of same-sex desire when it was intertwined with democratic ideals of community and nation.
So, how do y'all feel about that? Like, I know about looking back at the past and seeing people's writing that could be meant for the public or could not be meant for the public. And also the culture of the time wasn't allowing people to kind of be open. How do y'all feel about interpreting these things as homoerotic? Like, how do y'all feel about that? Do I feel like some things are so quite obvious, but and we talked about this with Luther about, if you don't come out, does it make it less gay? Or like it feels like people try to act like, oh, if they didn't identify as trans or if they didn't identify as gay themselves, we can't put that on them. But bitch, I can read. And you is not talking to Susie like that because you don't talk to your friends like that, my nigga. You don't talk to your home girl like that. There has to be something deeper than we just friends. And it makes sense that you will hide it and write it in your journals and write it to yourself. It you couldn't freely express that, so it will come out in your art, or it will come out in a poem, or will be in your journal. And you died, so people cared about your art, so people looked in your journal to see what your mindset was about it. I don't think that that's wrong for us to assume the eroticism of these things. I don't think that that's wrong. I think that it's common fucking sense. We couldn't talk about this stuff publicly because homosexuality was demonized. So you couldn't talk about what was going on. Especially for women. They didn't have any kind of power at the time. It was tons of coverture laws and fucking arranged marriages, and they couldn't have property, couldn't own property. It was tons of imbalance of power for women particularly. So yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
Herman Melville's 1850 review of Nathaniel Hawthorne's Mosses from an Old Man's in the Literary World is written in the voice of a man reading Hawthorne's book in an empty barn. A man of deep and noble nature had seized me in this seclusion. The soft ravishments of the man spun me round about in a web of dreams. But already I feel that this Hawthorne has dropped germinous seeds into my soul. He expands and deepens down the more I contemplate him, and further shoots his strong New England roots into the hot soil of my southern soul. Melville's articulation of erotic attraction for Hawthorne is extraordinary, even if coded. In a culture in which same-sex desire was not discussed...
Like, how we supposed to listen to that again?
I completely feel that this Hawthorne has dropped germinous seeds into my soul. He expands and deepens down the more I contemplate him, and further shoots his strong New England roots into the hot soil of my southern soul.
How are we supposed to think? You're talking about expanding and digging deep and shooting your hard German roots into my soil. Bitch, how are we supposed to take that? Nigga, we know what you talking about. Like, how we... Child. We know what that is giving.
Melville's articulation of erotic attraction for Hawthorne is extraordinary, even if coded. In a culture in which same-sex desire was not discussed openly, Melville's erotic words are completely absorbed into the American nation, from the North to the South. This vision, at once private, public, national, and emotional, is emblematic of how same-sex desire had become American.
Right.
The same-sex desires presented in literature were idealistic. In reality, same-sex sexual behavior was not always easily understood. The highly public marriage and highly private lives of Julia Ward Howe and Samuel Gridley Howe demonstrate how 19th century domestic culture was shaped by the emotional and sexual complications of people's lives. Born in 1801 to a prominent Boston family, Samuel Howe was inspired by Byron to fight in Greece's 1820 revolution. Returning to Boston, he dedicated himself to abolition and the education of the blind, a radical idea at the time. He also formed a passionate friendship with Charles Sumner, later one of the most vocal anti-slavery voices in the Senate, that was central to his life. In 1843, Howe married Julia Ward, later a prominent writer, social reformer, and author of The Battle Hymn of the Republic. While on his honeymoon, Samuel Howe wrote to Sumner, "You complain of your lonely lot, and seem to think your friends will lose their sympathy with you as they form new ties of love. But dearest Sumner, it is not so with me, and in the days of my loneliness and sadness, I never longed more for your society than I do now in my joy and in the whirl of London life. Hardly a day passes but I think of you, and long to have you by my side." For most of the marriage, Julia was emotionally estranged from her husband because of his attachment to Sumner. In the 3rd year of wedlock, while raising 2 children, she wrote to her sister, "Where shall I go to beg some scraps and remnants of affection to feed my hungry heart? It will die if it not be fed." During this time, Julia Ward Howe began writing The Hermaphrodite, an uncompleted novel that details the life and loves of Lawrence, who is both woman and man. Lawrence has bearded lip and earnest brow, falling shoulders, slender neck, and rounded bosom, and tells Emma, a woman who falls in love with him/her, "I am as God made me." Howe uses the noted Greek sculpture known as the Sleeping Hermaphrodite as a central image in the work and, as Fuller did with classical illusion, uses it to convey a multiplicity of meanings. The bi-gendered Lawrence is often confused about her/his life, but feels filled with enormous emotional and sexual potential that is, like the sculpture, sleeping. Although Emma calls Lawrence a monster, Howe's attitude to the character is kindly ambivalent. Later in the book, when Lawrence has a passionate, unconsummated affair with 16-year-old Ronald, Howe is overtly sympathetic. Scholar Gary Williams argues that The Hermaphrodite, which was not finished or published in Howe's lifetime, was her way of attempting to understand her husband's relationship with Sumner.
This
Not
is the
having a specific
sleeping
language for love between
hermaphrodite
men
sculpture.
that can coexist with a love between a man and a woman, Howe imagines a man-woman, in the classical mode, who is capable of both. Julia Ward Howe knew how to directly express what was wrong with her life. In 1854, she published Passion Flowers, a book of poems that openly spoke of her isolation as a woman and mother in a difficult marriage. But The Hermaphrodite is not simply coded fiction about a personal problem. It is a manifestation of a culture in which gender role limitations and non-traditional sexual relationships were actively, albeit in a coded way, discussed as political issues. Howe's involvement with a wide range of social change movements, helping to organize the American Women's Suffrage Association, convening the first national meeting of women ministers, and, as editor of the Woman's Journal, advocating a feminist argument for peace, informs how she thought her views about gender and sexuality were a vital component of full citizenship. Same-sex desire and the democratization of race. The influence of the Transcendentalists and their bold philosophical and social views promoted a public discussion that treated issues such as race, science, reproduction, gender, and sexual activity outside the realm of religion. For many of the Transcendentalists, science replaced theology as they embraced the new work in the natural sciences, including the theories of Charles Darwin. One of the Transcendentalists' greatest political legacies, articulated by Thoreau, but embraced in various forms by most of his circle, was the concept of civil disobedience. An individual's legitimate resistance to legal authority when her or his standard of personal morality is compromised. Throughout the century, the subject of race and racial difference was central to discussions of personal liberty and how the promised ideal of freedom could be manifest in a country that, amid institutionalized slavery, was becoming more diverse. These discussions happened in myriad venues. Pamphlets, broadsides, sermons, lectures, novels, and theatrical dramatizations, such as Uncle Tom's Cabin. Discussions of race did not focus solely on abolition. Leslie Fiedler's 1948 essay, Come Back to the Raft Again, Huck Honey, elucidates how American literature has a history of connecting same-sex male eroticism and interracial friendships between white males and men of either Native American or African descent. Such relationships appear in novels by James Fenimore Cooper, Herman Melville, and Mark Twain, among others. The association between male homoeroticism and race was not accidental and was easily integrated into American culture. Fiedler claims that these relationships are not just about race, but are reflective of a desired male flight from the civilization of women and the family into the freedom of natural wilderness. Sexuality and race are about bodies. In the 19th century, when both of these categories were hotly debated, they were inextricably bound with one another. Firm categories of race were disrupted by the shifting lines between indentured servant and slave, and between slave and freeman, and by the children of interracial couples. Intense same-sex friendships blurred the line between the romantic, the platonic, and the erotic. The categories of same-sex and opposite-sex relationships were consistently being redefined in relation to the categorization of race. Film historian Richard Dyer notes that same-sex heterosexual relationships reproduce racial similarity. Different race relationships do not. Fear of mixed-race offspring led to a variety of legal statutes designed to control individuals' behavior connected to race, especially sexual behavior. These statutes included miscegenation laws that prohibited marriage between people of different races, The first American miscegenation law was passed in 1664 in the colony of Maryland. They also included a wide range of Jim Crow laws, passed mostly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that mandated segregation. The joint construction of the categories of race and sexuality had implications for people who desired those of the same sex. Because same-sex couples could not have children, their relationships, while illegal under sodomy laws, were less scrutinized under race laws than heterosexual relationships and could often go unnoticed if the parties involved were discreet, as was always mandated by the sodomy laws. Because it was not reproductive, and thus, ironically, was safer, same-sex interracial coupling was often the subject of certain genres of fiction or travel literature.
So clock that. Clock that T, clock that T, clock that T. Did y'all hear? Clock that T. Because remember, last live we talked about, because sex was revolved around procreation, like even within marriage, it's like we supposed to be fucking to make babies. Just fucking for fun ain't T. That's ungodly. That's not holy. Holy is fucking for the creation of babies, to be fruitful and multiply. Just having sex is fornication, sweetie. Just to be having sex, that's giving into desires of your flesh. That's not what this is for. And so, since that scrutiny is kind of bubbling up, same sex, because it's not about, it's still considered illegal because sodomy, but because the race stuff is happening, motherfuckers was more worried about you having babies by these slaves and not worried to the point of, oh my God, we're gonna wear you out, because we know that wasn't happening. But looked down upon publicly more so than, because they didn't want races mixing. It was way more publicly looked down upon and spoken against than homosexual relationships, because y'all can't have no babies. Y'all ain't mixing. That's a nuance people don't talk about. So clock that T.
These works set a cultural standard in gay male writing and iconography in which interracial erotic relationships were a central theme. As an embodiment of the sympathy of social equality as well as erotic desire that is evident in Emerson and Thoreau, this literature became a place in which ideas about citizenship, especially in relationship to sexuality, gender, and race, could be publicly articulated and discussed. Many of these homoerotic novels are considered canonical to American literature, even as the same-sex eroticism is rarely discussed. Herman Melville's Moby Dick, 1851, as well as Typee, A Peep at Polynesian Life, 1846, and Omu, A Narrative of Adventures in the South Seas, 1847, are discussed in high school and college English classes. Charles Warren Stoddard's books, such as South Sea Idols, 1873, A Trip to Hawaii, 1885, and Island of Tranquil Delights, 1904, popular when published but infrequently read today, also contain explicit homoerotic content. These same themes, to a lesser degree, can be found in works such as James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans, 1826, Richard Henry Dana Jr.'s 2 Years Before the Mast, 1840, and Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1884.
Clock some of the shit that they're naming. So I want y'all to think about Last of the Mohicans. Now that was Kevin Costner, and Hollywood depicted it as this kind of it wasn't no homo shit going on. Like, and I want y'all to think about Moby Dick. When you was growing up, you didn't hear any kind of homoeroticism evolve with these stories. They were fucking queer washing these stories. A lot of the people, the intellectuals that we respect as writers and artists and poets, they were grappling with these things. But when we see their work depicted in the mainstream, a lot of times they have erased and sanitized a lot of it for us to consume. I know me growing up, it was we were dying for queer themed stuff. But if they were fucking doing their fucking job and being authentic to the work, we would have had some of the greats depicted who we consider to be the greats if we wouldn't have had them sanitized down to just fit this kind of heterosexual white narrative. We would know that, like I said, Moby Dick and some of these great things were for us too, about us too, about homoeroticism, about same-sex love, or or admiration, and it's it annoys me that, and we talked about this in Luther. I found much joy, regardless of how people think about the outing and talking about Whitney Houston and talking and Robin talking about Whitney in their relationship, and Patty talking about Luther being gay. I found so much joy in knowing that the people who I grew up loving their voice were queer. When that shit came out with Whitney, I was like, oh my God, yes, that is amazing. I love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. I love that, knowing that the voice, the voice of our generation, best-selling female artist, da 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 da, one of the best-selling female artists is queer. Love it. Love, 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 love it. And I think about that with all the art in the past. That was sanitized. And, even today when they're trying to ban books and shit like that. Yo, like, we've been out here grappling and pushing the envelope even when it wasn't safe for us to do it. And I personally don't appreciate it being erased. But what I love is why it's important for historians to exist and for us to explore, have the ability to explore texts like this and texts in the past with our eyes, because a lot of times they were exploring it with some heterosexual person was exploring it, and exploring it with our eyes and our sensibilities and our exposure to our culture, whether that be Black, whether that be queer, whether it be woman, whatever it is. We talked about in the chapter before this one, how women feminist historians went back and looked at the text that was going on, looked at journals from some of our authors, some of our greats and our leaders, and we're finding that many of them had queer relationships, and so I think it's important for us to look back and with our own eyes, not let go back to what I said yesterday or day before yesterday, about the African proverb: when the lion is telling a story, if the lion doesn't ever, whatever, if the lion doesn't ever get to tell the story, the fucking hunter is always going to be the hero. And so if we continue to let heterosexuals tell our story, or gatekeep our stories, or decide what stories are told, let the Ryan Murphys of the world tell the trans story, we won't, even though sometimes that's the only way we can get things made, through somebody like that, we won't have enough, or we will only see our story through what they value and what they think should be told. So it's important for us to look at it through our own lens.
The prominence of these titles indicates that homoerotic themes continue to be part of a vital discussion in American culture. Melville's novels, partially based on his South Pacific whaling ship expeditions, contains passages describing erotic feelings between sailors and island men. In Omu, Melville writes, "In the annals of the island are examples of extravagant friendships unsurpassed by the story of Damon and Pythias. In truth, much more wonderful, for, notwithstanding the devotion, even of life in some cases, to which they led, they were frequently entertained at first sight for some stranger from another island." In the next chapter, the narrator describes how he became the object of one native's affections. "Among others, Hulu was a candidate for my friendship, and being a comely youth, quite a buck in his way, I accepted his overtures. By this, I escaped the importunities of the rest. For be it known that, though little inclined to jealousy in love matters, the Tahitian will hear of no rivals in his friendship." The relationship dynamic gets more complicated in Moby Dick when Ishmael, the narrator, half-willingly shares a bed at the inn with the South Pacific harpooner, Queequeg. Upon waking next morning about daylight, I found Queequeg's arm thrown over me in the most loving and affectionate manner. You had almost thought I'd been his wife. The counterpane was of patchwork,
Period.
odd little party-colored squares and triangles. And this arm of his tattooed all over with an interminable Cretan labyrinth of a figure, no two parts of which were of one precise shade, owing, I suppose, to his keeping his arm at sea unmethodically in sun and shade, his shirt sleeves irregularly rolled up at various times. This same arm of his, I say, looked for all the world like a strip of that same patchwork quilt. Indeed, hardly lying on it as the arm did when I first awoke, I could hardly tell it from the quilt, they so blended their hues together. And it was only by the sense of weight and pressure that I could tell that Queequeg was hugging me. In this passage, implicit homoeroticism is juxtaposed with the domesticity of the classic New England quilt. Melville has titled this chapter The Counterpane, so there is no question that he intends for us to compare Queequeg's multicolored tattoos with the designs of the quilt. They are one and the same, inseparable. The homoeroticism is not expressed as an exclusive identity, but rather as a marker of democracy and American civilization, which is neatly folded into the uncivilized Queequeg. Melville's use of the metaphors of weddings and marriage throughout the book reinforces his vision of a republic resonant of interracial, same-sex relationships that blend nature with civilization to the point of creating a natural democracy. Stoddard's work, 2 decades later, is laced with similar scenes, often more overtly erotic in tone and description. Here the narrator first meets Kana'ana. So Kana'ana brought up his horse, got me onto it in some way or other, and mounted behind me to pilot the animal and sustain me in my first bareback act.
Period.
Over the sand we went, and through the river to his hut, where I was taken in, fed, and petted in every possible way, and finally put to bed, where Kana'ana monopolized me, growling in true savage fashion if anyone came near me. I didn't sleep much, after all. I think I must have been excited. After the narrator returns to the United States, he misses his chum and muses on what it would mean to bring him to civilization. I could teach him to dress, you know, to say a very good thing to your face and a very bad one at your back, to sleep well in church and rejoice duly when the preacher got at last to the amen. Stoddard presents a complicated relationship between the sexual freedom that Kana'ana represents and the narrator's desire to bring his friend to civilization, even as he admits that civilization is riddled with repression and hypocrisies. Like Melville, Stoddard is concerned with finding a way to merge what he idealizes as sexual freedom and lack of social constraint with the conventions of U.S. life. His attempt remains all the more powerful as a radical ideal, not a reality. Aside from fiction, few records document same-sex behaviors during this time. In his mid-century diaries, Philip C. Van Buskirk, an American Marine, details mutual sexual interactions among sailors. They include mutual masturbation, called going chaw for chaw, and anal intercourse, as well as sexual and romantic relationships between older sailors, often officers, and cabin boys as young as 13. In 1853, his diary records an older sailor's opinion about sex between men. While the sailor would punish men who had sex with men on land, he had no desire to do so at sea. What can a feller do? 3 years at sea, and hardly any chance to have a woman. I tell you, a feller must do so. Biles and pimples and corruption will come out all over his body if he don't. The open sea, like the open range, by offering escape from social condemnation, allowed for the articulation of same-sex desire and made same-sex sexual behavior natural and even utopian. Leslie Fiedler rejects the idea that male-male sex occurred because men were isolated from women in homosocial places. He suggests instead that this all-male isolation was sought consciously as an occasion for male encounters. Yet few of these same-sex erotic relationships among men at sea were interracial, furthering highlighting that when authors used the theme of same-sex, different-race eroticism, they did so to discuss the place of race in American society. Clearly, this theme resonated with readers. Melville's Omu and Typee had a wide readership. Moby Dick was not appreciated until the 20th century, as did Stoddard's South Sea Idyls. While romantic friendship, sympathy, racial mixing, and the desire to flee civilization were literary conventions of the time, in Melville's and Stoddard's novels, these themes become explicitly indicative of same-sex desire. In this context, Melville's allusions in Omu to Damon and Pythias, common in 19th century writing on male friendship, become clearly sexualized. In the early chapters of Moby Dick, Melville mentions Sodom and Gomorrah as a clue to his subtext. In the United States at this time, there was a strong, growing culture of women writers, such as Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote about race relations. None of them touch on same-sex, interracial, erotic relationships. Perhaps social prohibitions against women writing sexually tinged material, or readers' expectations that subject matter concerned the domestic rather than exalting the natural wilderness, prevented them from doing so. Although depictions such as Moby Dick and South Sea Idols modeled a progressive way of sex and race relationships, they also carried mixed messages. They were implicitly racist in othering men of color, routinely described as savages and barbarians. But they also value and praise these men for being natural, untainted by the social and sexual repression that was embedded in American culture. Melville and Stoddard, because they were writing about same-sex couples, actively blurred these boundaries. Kulu is both a primitive and a churchgoer. Weequeg's savage tattooed arm becomes the New England quilt. Kana'ana must be civilized, but civilization is hypocritical, not natural. The same-sex desiring American man feels the pull of freedom and persecution most keenly and is a ripe figure for exploring and understanding that dynamic. Whatever problems Melville and Stoddard betray in how they treat race, their work is clearly more complicated and nuanced than most of the contemporary political public discussions about race in a country split by the fight over slavery.
All right, so that is the chapter. I wanted to also point out, and I think that he's doing this because of and he will go into later versions. He just brought up Harriet Beecher Stowe. She was one of those kind of racist white women, early first wave feminist, who first wave white feminist. Because we talked about this the other day about how they love to make it seem like Black women weren't having any feminist ideals, ideas, and ideology. But it's because they were centering the white woman's voice, and Harriet Beecher Stowe was one of them. Even though there were Black women during that time writing and talking about these kind of ideals too, but just at the intersection of race and gender. So anyway, I wanted to talk about the last part where, if you hear what he's talking about different male experiences written by these authors, male same-sex experiences, and how they are going over here in Tahitian and kind of South Pacific cultures and exploring, and all of these kind of things happening from the male erotic, homoerotic perspective. And I don't think we get to see women's voices, because women are not allowed to kind of freely express themselves in the way that men are doing it. But he does also bring up the concept of of being forced in these kind of social homoerotic situations, homosocial, not homoerotic, homosocial situations, and then that could be the spark of like homoeroticism. But the counterpoint that he made at the end was like, this is where they go for the freedom to explore themselves, because you have the strict rules of society, and then boom, I get to go in the frontier, I get to go on the sea with the sailors, I get to go, you know um I get to go and do what I want to do. There's a certain level of freedom. And so I wanted to ask, because I hear this when we think about like prison, when we think about forced, that's a forced situation where forced in a same sex, homosocial environment, just is just one sex in this environment. And how does that breed um homosexuality, and how does that show up? Of course, you have men who do not experience homosexuality in prison, but the men who do, who are not homosexual outside of it, how does that how does the freedom from you already are a criminal in this particular situation. Just something I'm grappling with and thinking about. You already are a criminal, so you have been forced in this situation where you're just nothing but around men, and you are away from the world, and people are not writing you. People are some people are, but people are, almost like society has forgotten about you. So these rules, while that doesn't mean there's no rules in the prison, but the rules of outside world and expectations don't really apply. So how does that impact whether or not you do what you need to do, or do what you want to do, or explore in the way you want to explore? um how does that impact that? What are your thoughts about those type of situations? Like, because I hear people say, well, I was locked up, so if I might have did something, but when I got out of prison, I didn't do it. But while I was in prison, it's like almost like that is an excuse. Or how do y'all feel about that? Is that, and also that brings me back to a question that I've asked before, like even like be considering people gay. Now, of course, some ignorant um heterosexual cis person who don't have any kind of nuance, if you do anything, you're gay. But imagine that you are, if you, I think, current or recent, I won't say current, but recent situations. You remember on Insecure when Molly found out that her Trey had got his dick sucked in college and was like, I did it, but I didn't like it, so I didn't do it again. And people were like, what? And it turned into this conversation. Like, do you think that if somebody tries something in a certain situation but didn't like it and then never did it again, are they bisexual, gay? Like, what does that trying it one time permanently stamp them? Um, or or how long does that have to be? If my whole life I have been heterosexual and then never really thought about engaging in a homosexual relationship, and then when I hit 50, I start wanting to explore. How do you feel about that? What are y'all mindset about those experiences? Like, what's the is it a line for y'all? If you do anything with the same sex, then that's the line. If you try it, don't like it, never do it again, that's the line. Or what's the line for y'all for the label to for you to be bisexual? If if a gay man, a self-proclaimed gay man, they only do that to men. Amen. You better call it true. If a self-proclaimed gay man had sex with a girl at 16, didn't like it, didn't do it again. He said, I didn't like it. I tried pussy, I didn't like it. And now I'm gay. Do he permanently get the bisexual label since he had pussy? Or no? It seems like the trying it one time only applies to straight men, I fear. If a flamboyant gay man tries a female one time, they're still gonna look at him as strictly gay or bi or straight, not bi or straight. Gigi says, I've heard that conversation about sexuality in prison, but through the scope of obtaining humanity in a space where you aren't human, through queer affection, particularly for Black men. That's juicy. That's deep. Yes. So the eroticism is a grasp at intimacy. That the intimacy is a grasp at feeling human because shit, we're caged like fucking animals, and having the control of your body and having the control of being able to explore that sexuality and that intimacy is a grasp at humanity. That's quite deep. I think that that's deep. Um, yeah, I think that's deep. Actually, I can see that. I don't think that the labels are ever permanent. It changes over time. I feel like everybody's queer. I think everybody at least looks. Hmm. And then, and so when we think about, I don't know, it's like, what if you don't? Yeah, my friend was reading a book about Eldridge Cleaver's queer occurrences in prison. Eldridge Cleaver, in Soul on Ice, that's his book, his autobiography. One of the things that we talk about, I think, while I think it's disgusting, I think some parts of it, I think he was very honest and vulnerable in it. Not, and I'm not saying that it makes what his actions good, because he was raping women and being honest about raping women. He literally said, "I practice raping black girls so I can prepare to rape white girls, because white girls was the trophy. They were the ones, they as in the white man, put them on a pedestal and said that we couldn't have them, so it made us more attracted to them," talking about black men. And he talked about how he practiced raping black girls so he can learn how to effectively rape white women. And he talked about his prison situation. So, and while totally disgusting, I think it's disgusting. But I think him putting it in a book in Soul on Ice, I think him putting it in a book was quite powerful and an honest depiction of his circumstances and how many men might have been thinking, and it shows up in many places, might have been thinking back then when it comes to racial relationships, racialized relationships, and homoerotic relationships. um we make the labels permanent outside, people make the labels permanent, but I think our insides are always changing. Mm. My cousin had a baby in high school because penis and dick still work. But has been gay ever since, or gay the whole time. He just tried it out. Interesting. Once the deed is done, the definition still applies, even if it's not something you want to live by. I don't know. I don't agree with that, but it's not a right or wrong thing. I don't agree with that. But I do think a lot of people think like that. It's like I don't know. I was about to use like a food example. Like if I try some type of food, like if I'm Muslim and I don't eat pork, but for whatever reason, I either try it one time and don't ever do it again, or I eat it on accident and like it or something, or don't like it, but I never eat it again. I feel like there's a line. I don't think that makes you a pork eater. You just tried it, and if you didn't like it, you didn't like it. It would be interesting. I think liking it is to me is what defines it. Liking to me, liking even if you don't do it again, if you can admit that you liked it, I would be more willing to consider you bisexual because if you liked it, then the only reason why you are not exploring it on a regular basis is because something outside of yourself. I think if you liked it, if you tried it and you just didn't like it, then you just tried it and you didn't like it. So no. But it describes how society removed choice from the person that becomes the offender. Ooh, now that part I don't agree with. I don't think it removes choice, especially when it comes to that. Um, yeah, yeah. I understand. I want to have the intimacy. I want to have the intimacy, or you're forcing me to get intimacy in this way. I think that lack of I think we're blaming that lack of discipline because you cannot do that. Like it's I feel like I think we don't have to, I don't think we should take away the choice of making the choice of doing something because there are people who are not making the choice. Even if they want even if they want to do it, like even if they want and they want to have into that human intimacy connection, they're choosing not to have homosexual sex in the prison. They're choosing not to rape people in the prison. I think that I think that there's always the choice for you to act upon it, regardless if you want the intimacy or not. Yeah. I think the taking away that choice um to act on it. Yeah, you may not have a choice in who you have access to be intimate with. It may be just men in here. But you can choose to be celibate because just like on the outs, people choose to be celibate under whatever circumstances. You don't have to act on it. I don't think it's something that and you can find other ways to find your humanity through art, through reading, through whatever else, through doing nice things for people in the prison. There's so many ways where you can intimately connect that doesn't revolve around sex. So taking away their choice, I think is just an excuse that I don't want to I wouldn't give that. Food and religion is not the same. I think that it is. I think that goes back to even the situation with the choice. It's about the action of doing something. It's the simple act of doing, because we're talking about whether you're acting, doing the homosexual act, or the act of eating something that you're not supposed to do. It's just, I'm thinking of it just as the act of it. You feel what I'm saying? Like just the act of doing something. It got too close to justifying rape and pedophilia for me. Yeah, it would. Yeah, taking away the choice feels like an excuse that I can't accept. You can choose to not do it. My sexuality has morphed over and over again. The language I have used has changed over my life too. I think there are some people who are fluid like that, but I don't think everybody is fluid like that. Especially to the extent to change your label. I've never had vagina, and it's very, very few times that I have been attracted to somebody with a vagina. What I'm attracted to I wanna say it's expanded, but it expanded very little. Um, but I do think some people, the fluidity of their sexuality. Hey, Jenny. Hey, Missy. The fluidity of their sexuality has potential to be really, really expansive. But you know what I'm saying? I'm just sharing my own anecdotal experience. But I know people who like, bitch, you done switched up. You done explored and went in a whole different direction. Um, yeah, I think some people's sexuality is that fluid. I just don't I think some people are a little bit more fixed. For example, trying Buddhism one time doesn't make you a permanent Buddhist forever. I don't know, just my opinion on how I look at it. Yeah, there's no right or wrong in what we're just sharing opinions. So, yeah, I think that that's something too. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very simple. The act of trying something out and exploring, the act of exploring it. I don't think the act of exploring it makes you a thing. In my mind, the attraction is already there. Being in a confined environment allows me to explore the attraction. I assume that you talk about in prison, but what about the other scenarios that I gave? What about a situation where you're not in prison? I don't always think that the attraction is there. And in the sense of what we're talking about now, the fluidity. I think so. I've said this before. I think everybody queer. I think everybody queer. I do think some people are more fixed, but I think that under the right circumstances, with the right person, and at the right time, when the time is right, the person is right, and the circumstances is right, I think everybody can have a queer experience. I think that that is a possibility. If the time is right, if the person is right, if the yeah, circumstances, time, and person. When I have these conversations with heterosexual men or women who act like, oh, I'll never be attracted to this, da 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 da. I'm like, I was like, imagine who I would. I asked them. I asked them like, who is your person? Like, who is your like dream lover? Like, if you say a celebrity, what celebrity fits your perfect type? And say that they say, oh, Idris Elba, Aaron Pierre, he's popular right now. Maybe Holly Berry, Nia Long. They'll say somebody, Megan Good. They'll say somebody who um who are classic beauties, okay? Who are classic beauties who most people would look at and be like, oh, they're beautiful women, beautiful men, da 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 da. And I was like, what if you found a trans woman, if you're a heterosexual man, you found a trans woman that looked like Halle Berry, that had those whatever qualities that you like in Halle Berry, she looks like her. Um, or whoever you say, you find a trans man that look like Idris Elba. And I love using this example because there's as somebody who is trans who has traveled the world, I know y'all think that y'all can just tell. I know y'all think that just by looking at trans person, y'all can get just tell. But there are people in this world with different shapes, different bodies, different flaws, different blah 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 blah. There are people in this world who are navigating the world and you do not know that they're trans. Even myself, there are people that I have met that I'm like, I would have never known. There's nothing about them that's indicating that they are trans. Um, People, oh, I can always tell by the voice. Yeah, for some. Yeah, for the ones that you can tell by the voice. But what about the ones that don't have a deep voice? There are people who just have a very ambiguous look. I used him as an example. He's not trans. I haven't heard about him coming out as trans, but um um Alonzo Arnold. I feel like Alonzo Arnold has that kind of natural look that like, nigga, if you were trans, you could just be. Because before I know he done got his little BBLs and whatever he's doing, I don't know what's going on with it. But from what I have to know now, he is not trans, from what I'm to understand. But before any of that, when you look at him, you could tell, like, nigga, you could just be trans right now without any surgeries. You would look amazing. You already look the part. You look amazing because of the ambiguous nature of his look, the smallness of his look. And so, honey, you put a little bit of hormones in on that, a little bit of surgery. It's just what it is. And so, and there are people in the world. I told you, I thought a year, not years ago, about a couple of months ago, I told y'all this story about this man coming to me as a client, in my sex work business. Um, and in Except it's not a FFS face. It's just natural. It's not a FFS face. It's naturally there. Um, he came in. The client came in, and when I saw him, I thought that this was a stud. Like, I thought that this was a woman. So much so that he came in, he sat on the couch. I went to the back and was in the mirror like, what the fuck is about to happen? Because I was broke and I needed the money. And I was like, oh, I ain't never been with a woman. And I was in that mirror like, motherfucker, You can do it. You can do it. Get this money. Get this money. Cause I'm like, what the fuck? In my brain, I'm like, why you didn't tell me that you was a woman? But I thought that this was a woman. I saw hips, I saw breast, I saw a feminine face. He had long, wavy ass hair pulled back in a ponytail. It looked it like a stud. I was like, oh my God, what is about to happen? And so I came out of the bathroom fully prepared for him to pull down his pants and I see a coochie. And that is not what happened. He pulled down his pants and had a big old dick. And I was relieved, but I gagged because I'm like, yo, you really look like I had to stop the session and say, and explain to him that I thought he was a woman. Maybe I should have did that, but I'm like, yo, I really thought that you was a woman, and I was about to be in this scenario with a woman that I had never been in. And I'm like, this ain't how I wanted to wanted to lose my my V card. No. Oh my God. But yeah, I thought that it was a woman. There are some men, and I another dude I met on Tag a couple of years ago. And he hit me up and I was like, sweetie, I'm not into women, baby. That's not my tea. He was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I was like, I'm not into women. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? I'm telling you I'm not into women. And he was like, I'm not no fucking woman. I was like, what? For real? You look like a girl. And he was like, how the fuck I look like a girl? I was like, you look like a girl to me. He looked like a girl to me. Like his whole face looked like a woman. Like everything about him looked like a woman. So, and so there are people out here who don't need a lot of work. And if they are trans, they can easily transition. I think about Nikki Airgoose. I said, Nick, when I first met Nikki Airgoose, rest in peace. Um, I met Nikki Airgoose at this place called Houston Area Community Service. It's called Avenue 360 now. But I met her at it was a housing place, and they had a clinic in there for you to get like come pick up your hormones, and there's tons of stuff that they had there. And so sometimes if they don't have any facial hair, yeah, neither one of these people have facial hair. Um and I walked in there and there's this really itty bitty white woman, and she runs up to me and she was like, "Oh my God, Diamond Styles, how are you?" Da, 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 da. And I'm looking at her because this is a white woman that I don't know. Real, she's like 5'2". Everything about her is small. Her hands, her feet, her body, her everything about her is small. And pretty ass. She ain't got no makeup on, pretty ass hair. She just looks like a regular run of the mill white girl. And I'm just looking at her coming up to me, and I have no idea who this woman is. And she was like, "You don't know who I am? You don't remember me?" And I was like, "No," because I don't really have a lot of close white friends. And if I have white friends, the white friends that I have, they are my friends because of community. Like we have been in activism together. But like a white friend that's close enough to me to come to my house like for Thanksgiving, I don't have that. Um a white friend that I can call on the phone and say, "Oh my God, I need your help." I don't have that. I don't have close white friends. I have white associates. And so her coming up to me like, I should have a history with her. I'm like, oh no, I don't know nothing about you. And baby, when she said it's Nikki, and she told me her story, I had been like talking about her story for so many times, and I was like, I did not expect you to look like this in person. And it's not that she didn't look like herself. I don't know. And she just didn't. She just didn't. She just looked like a regular ass white girl. Regular, degular. And her smallness, it was the overall look of her. It was her, she had her little glasses on. She had her little, she just was a regular, degular, small, petite, little. She's like 5'2", y'all. This is her. She's like 5'2", super, super slim. And she just was, baby, epitome of regular, degular cunt, fish, or whatever y'all want to call it. Just the epitome. The epitome, baby. I feel like Alonzo is about to be trans. I always felt that, especially once the BBL shit start happening. But I don't like to, sometimes the non-binary thing is how gay men do with bisexual. They bisexual till they accept their whole queerness, even though they ain't never been with no woman, but they'll say they're bi, but that nigga, you just gay. But and she had a style that was just like a regular woman, not so extra. Yes. Yes. I think that's also what allowed her to just kind of blend and do her thing. Um who else? Yeah, I think the non-binary thing now is, oh, I'm not trans, I'm non-binary, even though I don't think that they, especially in the process of us, um in the process of trans being so demonized, and as soon as you come out as trans is just engulfed as your identity. I have that kind of issue too. So me and my friend, my sister and her homegirl, we talked about it, and that's something that once you are, you've known as an identity, that people don't want you to explore other stuff. They don't want you to explore. That's why, we get booked heavily during Pride, booked heavily by, maybe Black History Month, maybe, but you can't, your expertise or your full humanity is never appreciated. And I think some people, um and I think some people, because of that, they don't want to fully commit to being trans, and so they'll say, oh, I'm non-binary. Or and I'm not saying that non-binary doesn't exist, but I do think that it can be used as a gateway till they're comfortable in accepting that I'm really just a trans woman. Or I'm really just a trans man. um Girl, don't nobody want to be constrained by the binary. No, that's true. And I think that, but I think this is problematic, maybe. But I think how people live, especially people that I'm talking about right now, is still a binary. So it's just you're just including another color. You got black, you got white, and you got gray. You're choosing to be in gray, but you're not shaking up the binary. It's still the binary. You just choosing to be gray. You're choosing to be in the middle. It's still the linear binary. And you're expressing yourself either way. Honey, you're doing hair, nails, makeup, blah, 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 blah. And so your expression is still woman. It's not like you mixing it up. It's just still like stereotypical woman or stereotypical man. You're not even mixing that shit up. Um, so it's not like you're doing something that's kind of breaking down the binary. It just feels like you are you're just using that as a label to not cop to either one. And I get it. I get it, but it doesn't feel like you're being groundbreaking. It doesn't feel like you're breaking down. If you're saying you're non-binary, but you're wearing makeup, wigs, dresses, corset to make your waist smaller, pads to make your hips bigger, your whole presentation is like a woman. What is non-binary about how you're expressing? Just your body, your natural body. You still trying to give the image of a stereotypical woman. You're not doing anything that makes me feel like you breaking it up. I love your accessories today. Thank you. This is my Versace necklace and my Versace earrings. I love these. Old school, vintage. I love these too. Clothespins. I love them. I see that a lot. Crossdresser. Thank you. Um, Santana is non-binary. I mean, anybody can be. Um, I don't get it. Like it's for. I don't get it. Like it. Wait, hold on. You gotta be using commas, girl, so I can understand. I don't get it. Like it is for ally point. Retype that sentence so I can understand what you're saying. Sorry, it is for ally points. Can you be non-binary but leaning? I don't know. I think you can be anything you want to be. I'm just talking about it, just examine it from my point of view. I'm a binary girl, so I can't, I'm just my point of view of what I see and how I'm examining the world that I see in. There's certain people like Alok. I think that there's another, is it I can't remember his name, their name. Um, there are certain people that I'm like, oh, you feel like you are bucking up against the binary. Your expression is I'm literally doing whatever the fuck I want to do. Excuse me. And I can see how it is sometimes it's leaning towards more film, sometimes it's leaning more towards mask, sometimes it's just kind of nothing. I can see how your mindset around your expression is not gender based. It's what you want to do. It's how you want to dress and how you want to do it. I can see it. And then there's some people who I'm like, I don't see how you're bucking up against the system at all. I understand that. I know for me, my expression as a non-binary person is rooted in my comfort and not in performing an aesthetic or a norm. And I think that can is really easily conveyed by some people where it's like, oh, I can tell that it's you just doing what you want to do and it's not really based on anything. It's not really it's kind of like it may be based on some things, but it just you can see a certain level of freedom. But when people are just it's just you literally are doing every single thing that women do, and it just doesn't feel like you're bucking up against the binary. Carrie Underwood is a Trump supporter. um I don't find that to be surprising. She is a blonde white woman that's in country. Like if Dolly Parton ever came out and said that she was a Republican, that would not necessarily. Well, kinda. Dolly has been very no, not Dolly. Dolly isn't a good example, but Winona Judd or them classic country people learning that they are Trump supporters does not um is not surprising for me. It just doesn't feel surprising. But yes, I say that I say that to there's some I said all of that to talk about sexuality. And I tell people certain circumstances, that's where I was headed with the point. I kind of got sidetracked. But if you're in a situation where and this is even not even on no queer shit. Well, on some queer shit, but not even on think about it. Like a lot of times why we don't have relationships that we don't be caught up in relationships like we used to is because we are not forced in social situations. When we were younger, we were forced to be around people because we had to go to school with them. Um, a lot of people in adulthood, they find love at work because they're forced at work with these same people every day, forced to get to know them. And so we a lot of times are are when in our younger years, people were forced to be around queer people. The queer people in their school. So the quote unquote temptation maybe didn't bring itself didn't come up in there doesn't come up if you don't have queer people around you. I think about the dudes that I messed with when I was younger. It was because we were in either the group home together, we lived in the same apartment complex, We went to the same high school or we went to the same college. I feel as a trans woman, I'm perceived as a freak of nature in public is torture. How do you not care if you have a 9 to 5? Kelly, yes, trans women can be transphobic. Um, how do you not care? Um, how do you not care? I don't know. Like, I don't be getting clocked like that. So I don't really have to navigate people bothering me when I was at work. And then when I would get clocked, it was just a small little awkward moment. And then it'll pass. Like it never was constant. It never was constant. But those little awkward moments, I just stopped caring. I don't know how I stopped caring. Um, I just, I mean, I don't give a fuck. Like it just got to a point where I don't give a fuck. And it happened over time. It wasn't like I did something and then I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna do this and not care." Um, I'll come back to your question, Kelly. Once I get done talking about Vampire Goddess. Um, but I just stopped. I don't know. I just stopped caring about. Um, I just stopped caring about getting clocked. I don't know how to. I don't know how to describe what happened. I just got to a point where, I mean, who gives a fuck? What you gonna do? It just it doesn't. I'm not thinking about. I don't really give a fuck. I didn't become trans because I gave a fuck about what people think. Once I said I'm trans, that means fuck the world. That means fuck what you think about me. Fuck what you think I'm supposed to be. When I decide to flip whatever against the grain that being trans is in my brain, it's like I don't give a fuck. Like the whole point of me doing living my life the way I want to live it is because I don't give a fuck about what you think a woman is, what you think a man should be, what you think a person born a boy could become. The whole point of me deciding to live my life in my truth is not giving a fuck about what people think. So why, when I'm at work at my 9 to 5 job, why, if you figure out that I'm trans, why would I give a fuck about what's going on in your mind about me? You most of the time, and then another thing, sometimes we can overthink what somebody else might be thinking because unless they come out of their mouth and say, "Oh, you're a freak of nature," then you don't really know what they're thinking. Sometimes motherfuckers don't be giving a fuck. And sometimes you just a gag. Sometimes the gag is it's not that I think you're a freak of nature. It's just your boldness of being who you are in this space. And I'm surprised that you're even in this space. It's like no. It's like sometimes they're not even thinking what your brain is kind of overthinking and making them and coming up with a narrative of how people think about you. Sometimes they are gagging and being late and thinking late things, but who gives a fuck? Um, I think having an affirming community helps with finding security too. I think that absolutely, and I think that that is a privilege of my life. I've never had a transition without a friend. I've never had to, my transition, I have always had a friend who was also trans that, I could, you know, there was always affirmation there. And so I didn't grow up or come into my trans identity like fully alone like some people. And so I had my gay friends, I had my trans friends, I had, you know, my family who, has some certain spicy people, but in general, my family was cool. Um, so there was some clashes, but not enough to make me feel like I was ever alone. I think the time that I felt the most alone when it comes to my transition was when I was at Jackson State. And it was because I was alone and because it was the first time that I was alone, period. When I was in high school, I had all my friends. So I never had a chance to feel alone. Even if I'm at school, oh, when I get out of school, me and my friends are going to the mall together. Um, but when I was in college, I really felt alone because it was the first place that um even the cis women and the gay men were like shunning me. I had never experienced that in my life. It was always, back home, it was always a gay boy you could be cool with, or a lesbian, or a dyke, or you know what I'm saying? It was always somebody. But in at Jackson State, it was nobody. I was alone. There were queer people, but they stayed away from me. So, so the best way that I could, if I'm to advise you, is just go to work, do your time at work, and go home. But when you go home, kick it with your friends, kick it with your people. Don't overthink how people are perceiving you. You there to do a job, do your job well, and go home. No, I'm talking about like if you have customers, like shit like that. But now people you work with, that can kind of get spicy. If they can't affect your job, don't worry about them. Just do your job well. If you're the best person at doing your job, that's the least chance that you got to get fired. So just do your job well. Don't try to make no. Nah, I'm somebody, I don't like making friends at work. I'm here to do a job. I don't need you in my business. I don't add people on my list. That's at my job on my friends list. I don't know. I don't do all that. I don't know if you like that, but I suggest don't do it. Separate job and home. I don't know if that's good advice or not, but that's how I do it and it worked. All right. Let me go back up to Kelly's before I forget. So Kelly says, "Can trans women be transphobic?" And then she says, "How?" And she says, "How can trans women be transphobic? Do tell." So Kelly, define, what is your definition of transphobic? What is your definition of somebody being transphobic? What is the definition of it? And while you tell me, I will look it up. I know what it means, but let's look at what it means. Now you're asking more questions. So let's stick with the first question. Tell me what, let's stick with the first question and then I'll go to that one. So, what is your definition of being transphobic? What's your definition of transphobic? Side note, can you disclose while Kelly answers? Side note, can you disclose who was the doctor who does facial silicone? There's so many different better options. They have so many better fillers now that you can use. I love this lady out of I know her name is Moya. I don't know her last name. If you send me an email, diamondstyles at gmail, I will find it for you and send it back and send you the information. This chick out of San Francisco, her name is Moya something. I know her as Moya. She does really, really good filler work for trans women out there. Really, really popular. You can really get good work from her. But actual silicone, I think it's just I think silicone is out of I don't think you should be getting silicone right now. There's tons of other ways to enhance your body that are safer and just better now. As somebody who I love my silicone work. um, I think it's just safer ways now. When I was younger, um, who the work I got work done by. She's in prison now. Well, she's dead now. She died in prison, but she's in prison now. By this chick named Tracy in Mississippi. She killed somebody. I got some, but I got that removed. Um, I got done by um, Mocha Montrese. Um, yeah, but I got all of that removed when I got my FFS. What could be removed? To get silicone removed, there's tons of doctors to do it. I went to Dr. Cardenas in Guadalajara. But there's tons of doctors here in America that do it now. Dr. Z, Dr. Just it's tons. I haven't had surgery since 2000 and like facial work surgery. I haven't had that since 2013. Um, so I haven't been in the game of looking for like surgeons and stuff like that. So I don't know who's new and who's fire out here yet. Um, So I wouldn't be a good person because all of my stuff is going to be information about who's doing work is probably going to be dated. I still like Dr. Spiegel in Boston's work. Is he retired? Does he still work? I still like his work. Yeah, yeah, I don't really know. But Kelly, you didn't answer my question. What is your definition of transphobic? Thank you for helping me out. No problem. Silicone is outdated. Yeah, I think there's tons of other stuff that we can get now. Are you officially done with surgery? I'm officially um no, I'm not. I think that surgery helps your confidence. I think that surgery is something that I am not opposed to ever at all. I do have plans for my 50th birthday or maybe not the birthday, but around my 50th, a gift to myself is to do some type of spruce up like a facelift or I do have a dream if I'm doing well financially to do something for my 50th birthday that's like a spruce up. Um, but as far as like transition stuff, like stuff that is gender affirming, yes. I don't need anything that makes me feel like, oh, I'm a I'm living my truth. I want my body to match my outside. I Once I got my FFS, I felt like very, very comfortable with how I looked and presented to the world. Um, um, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with my body. I'm pretty comfortable. I was getting a little big, so that's why I got my sleeve. I was getting a little bigger than what I wanted to be. Um, that's why I got my sleeve. So yeah, I'm not opposed to any kind of surgery.